Welcome to the MOGL podcast. I'm Tim Bryson, Director of Athlete Education and Compliance, and I'm the host of our show. If this is your first time here, welcome. If you're a returning community member, welcome back. As y'all know, the MOGL podcast is dedicated to educating all NIL athletes and brands on how to ensure compliance, how to maximize NIL activity, and how to make a difference in the ever-evolving NIL landscape. Today's guest is a special guest, one that I've known for quite some time now, former colleagues and coworkers, if you will, but someone who has a firm understanding of not just student athlete development, not just NIL education, but truly curriculum design and higher education enterprise as a whole. Very excited to speak with this individual despite their alma maters, but without further ado, before I embarrass you, Sophia Baur-Waisbord, what's popping?
What's up, Tim? Thanks for having me on. It's about time we've had some of our conversations on podcasts.
You know, I did this on purpose. And then you're right. Again, Walk with TV is coming back. We talked about that. And I can't say too much on the airwaves right now, but it's going to be phenomenal when it does. But first and foremost, I got to point out your, what do you call it, a spicy jacket? What do you call this thing?
It is a spicy jacket. We got some leather reptile print, a little green, some zippers.
What does he get that from, imported from Sydney, yo?
No, I mean, I'm not sponsored by them, but shout out Newly, one of the most affordable clothing rental services out there that I highly recommend to anyone who doesn't use it, and allows you to get like spicy pieces like this that you don't have to keep forever. You can return them after a month.
You have an affiliate code you want to share as well?
That's what I'm saying, not yet, but maybe if Newly's listening to this, I'll get one. And that's NUULY for anybody out there listening.
All right, I'll be sure to tag them when we post this episode to our social accounts. But Sophia, this is going to be a good episode. It's going to be a really good episode. And we're going to start with segment one, as you already know, you've seen the outline. But I want us to focus our conversation on first your story and how you got to where you are today, particularly at the University of Maryland.
Definitely. So I'll start off by just sharing with everyone. I think one of the most important things about my upbringing and just like growth as who I am, I moved around a lot growing up. So whenever people are like, oh, where are you from? Like, where do you call home? I say I'm from Atlanta, which truthfully, I only really lived there from middle school all the way until I went to college. But that's just because I moved around a lot because of my parents' jobs. Growing up, but I do call Atlanta home. I think that's important because when I went to undergrad at the University of Michigan, which is a special bond between us. I can't wait until the game this year because we all know that Michigan's gonna win. But anyways, so that was like a family school for me. Like I grew up knowing about Michigan. My grandfather, my great uncle went there. But I was going there like very far from home. Like no one else from my high school was going to college that far. Everyone was going to either University of Georgia, Georgia Tech, Georgia State, Kennesaw State. And so for me, I actually went through a lot of my own identity development my freshman year of college because I was so far from home, far away from people that I knew. There's probably only one other person from my high school who was at the University of Michigan. And that's a huge campus to go somewhere where you don't know anybody. And so I think that's really what actually jump-started a lot of my interest in higher ed and the student experience. I didn't even know it when I was 18-year-olds at that point because I had to really push myself to build community in so many different ways, whether that was through residence life. I ended up joining a sorority my freshman year. I got involved in student government later on. Like I had to really find different communities that supported me and my growth there because I was so far away from home. But that was like a really important time in my life and really figuring out who I am and growing, in like confidence in a lot of different areas in my life. Took on a lot of leadership positions and the things I got involved in too, which I think gave me another perspective of the college student experience. Specifically took a course my senior year of college that was about the history of higher ed using the University of Michigan as a case study. And that was when I really was like, I could probably work in this field, I think, because I remember the first class we looked at university mission statements and how do those apply to what the university actually does. And so every university has some version of preparing citizens for the future and going out, impacting the world. And I took that as an opportunity to realize, well, is this true for all groups on campus? Is the university living out that mission for all different groups of students on this campus? And specifically, I took a look at it in terms of student athletes. I was an intern for the University of Michigan football team for little over 2 years. When I was in college, I was actually thought I was going to be a sports nutritionist. So I worked in sports nutrition with the Michigan football team. And that really exposed me to honestly a lot of disparities that exist and like a lot of systemic issues that I found in terms of supporting student athletes for life post-competition. Knowing that a lot of University of Michigan football players do come in with the goal to, go pro. A lot of them end up doing that, but thinking about like what other options exist for them and what kind of support exists there. After I graduated from Michigan, I went and worked for my sorority's headquarters as a consultant, a leadership consultant. I basically traveled around the United States and Canada for 2 years, visiting over 50 different college campuses and working with young women, helping them grow in their career development, identity development, leadership development skills, which really, I really think kickstarted my career into higher ed. So after that, went and got my master's in higher education, focused my time there on designing interventions and programs to support the career development of student athletes, which was interesting doing that at an Ivy League institution that doesn't have student athlete development formally in its model, because of the desire of Ivy League institutions to support student athletes the same way they support other students. So there isn't a ton of concentrated support in terms of student athlete development, but really got a chance to kind of be on the ground floor of what that could look like, specifically at Harvard. And then after that, I got my first role at the University of South Florida. Shout out Taylor Onion and Kristen Harris. I got to work in their student athlete enhancement department, which was like a great opportunity to just get exposed to a lot of different areas in student athlete development. But then that brought me here to Maryland, and really my role at Maryland is a dream job for me when I took it on. Was an opportunity to come in and create something, work alongside a great team, and just really be at the forefront of leading student athlete development in terms of ways that's innovative and different than how I think people traditionally view it in terms of resume workshops, career fairs and those kinds of things.
It's an excellent start, yo. It's an excellent start. And I think me even knowing you now, 2-3 years, I'm even learning more about your story today. But one thing that came to mind when you were speaking, yo, and again, this is our conversation on a regular, so I'm not pressured or stressed or anything like that. Right, but you from Atlanta, right? You said Michigan's a family school. Yeah, it's a family school. And I think people that look at the rankings for whatever their word know that Michigan's a top 2, 3, number 1 public school in the US. You then go to Harvard, right? Number 1 private, top 3 school in the world, right? So I think many may look at your resume or experience, right? And just say, like, what does Sophie know about college sport? Like, what does Sophie really know about the nuances of Division I, Power 5, given a lot of people focus on that, understanding that majority of athletes obviously aren't D1 Power 5 school. Nevertheless, that's what we're talking about here. What's your response?
I think I have 2 parts. So when we talk about rankings, what's interesting. So one thing I didn't share is my dad is an immigrant to the United States. He was born, raised, lived most of his life, young life, I guess, in Argentina. And so having a parent who is an immigrant, I think when we look at college choice really differently than I think a lot of people who have, parents who were born and raised in the US and then raised also their kids here, is the power of what college can do for you and the doors that it opens for you. So that's kind of how I was raised thinking about college. So when I was choosing, do I stay in Georgia and go to the University of Georgia, or do I go to the University of Michigan? The answer was easy to my dad. When I was choosing grad school, where do I go for grad school? The answer was easy to my dad because of his perspective of knowing the power of the name of an institution, and what doors that opens for you in terms of education. So that, I think, to address that first piece. The second piece in terms of how does that relate to college sport, I think that means I've seen college sport on a variety of different levels, right? Like I see extremely talented athletically, but also academic individuals come to University of Michigan, come to Harvard, and that opens a lot of doors for them, being able to say, I have a degree from the University of Michigan and played college football there. I have a degree from Harvard and I was on, the rugby team there, whatever that looks like. I think we have to think about what is the power of the educational degree have for that person who's also playing on a team there. What kind of skills does that give them? What kind of life experiences does that give them? And connections in terms of networking, meeting professionals, that piece. And then I think being able to look at it when you throw in my experience with USF, like I've just worked at a variety of different institutions that attract different students based on regional athletic opportunities, the majors that those schools even pull too, right? And so different areas of the country, like that is even something that I think we don't totally think about all the time, right? Is like, how does your experience going to college in Boston different than going to school in Tampa? And so I think that's how I would respond to that in terms of having a variety of experiences at different levels, athletically and academically. So an athletic experience at an Ivy League is obviously going to be different than at a Big Ten school. And I think being able to have worked with students in both capacities who are extremely talented academically too is something that I don't take for granted in terms of my experiences, that I think allows me to connect with people in a different way than if I, only had one experience in one type of school that I, in one region of the country.
That's good stuff. I'm just asking you challenging questions because that's my job, being, your best friend. Sorry, everyone else listening to this podcast. But two, as I told you before, Sophie, you're one of the most intelligent people I've ever met in my life. That's on the record for those that are listening as well. But two things you said in particular, right, is that environments matter, right, with the example of Boston and Tampa, which is very true. And then two, that the name of an institution does hold weight. Segment 2, Maryland Made holds weight. And you've been integral in helping to build Maryland Made to what it is and where it's going. So for those who may not be familiar with the #1 student athlete development program in the United States of America, what is Maryland Made? Sophie, talk to us.
Maryland Made is one of the most special environments I've had the privilege of working in, I think. So obviously have to give credit where credit is due. Shout out to Tim and Risa for really building something that I think is, when I do recruiting visits, I say you will not find anything like this at any other school that you go to. And trust me, I visited a lot of schools. And so people are always like, oh, are you sure? I'm like, no, I've been to over 50 different college campuses. I know what exists, right? And so for me, when I describe Maryland Made, it's a bunch of authentic people supporting young people to be who they want to be too. And I think that's what is at the core. Take away the leadership education, take away the careerness. That's something that you get out of being involved with Maryland Made. But at its core is Maryland Made is professionals who live their authentic lives, have collected all these experiences and stories, have their networks, and they're helping other young people do the same thing. And I think that is what at the core student athlete development should always strive to be, right? Because I think that's how we create successful people for life after competition. It's not how many resume workshops did you attend, how many people are you connected with on LinkedIn. It's these other pieces of student athlete development, which are fundamentally at the human and the people part of our job, that I think is what makes Maryland Made special. And because that's who we are, we're able to provide different leadership and career and identity development opportunities that really support our students while they're here at Maryland. We really center that collaboration and that ownership. So it's not us leading them all the time. It's them taking ownership of their own learning journey. And we're building things with them to create experiences that they want, that make them feel at the end of the day like they can go out and be a successful person because of what they gained while they've been at Maryland.
That's good stuff, yo. And again, you came in year 2, year 3 of the program's inception, if you will, but came in uniquely under some donor dollars, right? And we're tasked as given and really empowerment to create the Kubasik First Impact Program. As you mentioned before, right, there's a lot of identity communities within higher education. We can focus on Black students, Latinx students, college athletes, etc. But I think one student population that we've seen more conversation and hopefully more programming tailored to our first generation college students. So one, what is the Kubasik First Impact Program? And then two, why first gen? I know you've done a lot of reading and connecting about this. So excited to hear what you have to say.
Yes. So the Kubasik First Impact Program was a program, thanks to the support of the Kubasik family, really designed to help second year college athletes with identity development and major/career exploration. That is my tagline. That's all my marketing materials. But really what it is to me is a group of current second year students who really just need access to resources and education to help them figure out what they're doing here. And I think that has been, since its inception, the core of the program is people in higher ed refer to the second year students across campus, not just college athletes, as the lost class. They go through the sophomore slump, the forgotten class. We've come up with all these taglines for them. But I have not really seen a ton of dedicated support to supporting second year students. I think you see a lot in residence halls. There's some universities that have specific residence hall experiences for second year students. But what the research finds is that second year students, they get a lot of support and attention during their first year on campus because they're transitioning. They go to orientation. They're trying to make new friends. They go to UNIV 100 courses that help them get exposed to university. And they get to their second year. And it's oh, you should have this figured out by now. But most of them, especially when we're thinking about the impact of COVID, they still don't have friends. They don't have those social skills. They don't really know how to navigate and move around a university. They have to select a major, but what they may have come in thinking about their first year, they took classes that maybe didn't do that well in, they thought were really boring. They didn't like the professors. And now they're like, okay, so how do I figure out this career piece? And then when you think about what else exists in terms of concentrated support, you think about third and fourth year students, and they're getting all the internship support, they're getting all the transitioning out of college support, they're getting, the networking nights and the career fairs that are geared towards students with 2 to 3 semesters remaining, whatever. And so we really do have this forgotten group of students that don't really know how to navigate a university anymore because everyone's kind of taking the attention off of them. So then to add on the first generation piece is that's something that's kind of coming into mainstream conversations in universities. And I think it's important that we define what first generation means, because everyone has, differing definitions of that. I would say at Maryland Made, we've really adopted the definition of first generation means one or both of your parents did not graduate from a 4-year institution. I think it's important that we're explicit in that language, because some people, include community college in that conversation. Some people just include attend, but I think it's important that we're clear about that definition, because those are students that might face specific barriers that they don't have people back at home and they can call and ask about. I mean, I think when I was in college, I was calling my mom 5 or 6 times a day. Both my parents have PhDs, right? They knew how to navigate a university. But when we think about first generation students, is they don't feel comfortable going office hours because they don't even know what the word office hours means sometimes. Does that mean I show up to your office for an hour? Like, what does the term office hours really mean, right? And that's just like one example, I think, of things that we see in the research about first gen students. Thinking specifically that when campus is closed for holidays, that's a barrier for a lot of first generation students, because they don't know, like, oh yeah, you're coming home for 3 weeks during winter break. Like, that's not a normal thing that's become normalized in their family, right? And so we saw a bunch of different identities that were impacting college athletes. They were second year, they might identify as first generation student, they're also college athletes, and we're like, we need a program that's a year-long program that supports them in understanding their own identities and also how they can connect that to a major that they need to select, and then a career path that they see for themselves long-term. That Jane Kubasik, one of the donors to the program, she also talks about this idea of financial mobility. So not only are you selecting a career, but you're selecting a career for yourself that gives you financial mobility, understanding that first generation students feel a lot of financial pressure, a lot of responsibility to support their families. And so how are we making sure they're not just coming in, picking a job or a major that then just like leads to a random job, but there's really intentionality behind that that's going to give them mobility in the future.
So I think anyone listening to the podcast at this point is like, all right, Maryland Made is dope, right? They're doing some stuff around career and leadership, first gen identity, whatever. This is an NIL focused podcast, NIL education podcast. And we were both, I think, employed, if not soon to be employed at the University of Maryland at the time that NIL dropped. And we're like, yo, everyone's asking, what are y'all doing? We're like, we've been doing this. And so pivoting our conversation a little bit to talk more about the intersection and alignment of NIL and athlete development programming. I think some people look at it as like separate units, and honestly, some schools have separate units, right? Separate staff for that. There are others where it's more integrated, but it's more like one-off type programming, right? But I'm confident, and I've seen and I've experienced how you have integrated, how Maryland Made has integrated NIL education, right, this broad term, into the athlete development experience, so that that's all aligned and in sync. Could you just talk more about your philosophy with including NIL education as part of athlete development? Because I think that's a huge opportunity for us to all observe and take in together.
So I think one thing that I say to you a lot is like, this isn't rocket science. And that's kind of how I feel about NIL. Like, I know there is a lot of legislative policy compliance, and that related to NIL that probably is actually more complicated, maybe not equivalent to rocket science, but close. But the fundamental education part to me is not rocket science, because to me, NIL is an opportunity to give students skills that make them career ready. And so one specific example I'll talk about is we have an athlete on the track team, Max Myers. He has his own, he, has been an intern at Microsoft. He, was in Seattle this past summer. He has his own like resume, cover letter business that he does, that he provides. And, obviously his credentials speak for himself, right? Like, take a resume workshop or cover letter workshop from a Microsoft intern, current D1 track student, etc. we brought him in to facilitate a session 2 weeks ago for the Kubasik First Impact Program, teaching them about building your resume to get the interview or to get the internship that you want. And we paid him for it, right? Like, I think that is NIL. And we told the students at the end of the program, I said, y'all know how Max got up here? And they were like, no. And I was like, this man runs his own resume cover letter business. The skills that you're getting tonight can help you continue to educate other people moving forward, and you get paid for it. I had a conversation with a student in the program. He wants to be a coach and a physical education teacher. That's the kind of the career that he selected through the program. And I said, okay, well, what are you thinking internship wise? He's like, oh, I'm not sure yet. I'm like, okay, well, why don't you run your own business coaching students? That's an internship, and it's also getting you money, and it's leveraging your NIL through being an athlete at Maryland. And I think we overcomplicate these things in terms of just thinking about, at its core, is an opportunity to give these students skills that help them be successful professionals, right? Like, they are able to talk to companies and negotiate for themselves. That's something you have to do as a professional, right? Like, it's teaching them how to build these different career skills that give them visibility in these different spaces to get opportunities for themselves, whether it's an internship, whether it's a job, and just learning those fundamental, in my opinion, branding skills that I think is helpful in terms of whenever you're meeting somebody new, you have to explain who you are and what you do. And that's what NIL is allowing these students to do, is tell their stories and really talk about who they are so that other people can connect with them and get them opportunities that are going to help them.
So this is good. And I think knowing us, we could talk about this for an hour and a half or really a day and a half. But I think, again, hearing this is like, yes, that makes sense. No, yes, it's not rocket science. No, it's not rocket, whatever. It's Harvard talk, Harvard speech. But like, I guess what is missing, right? Because at the end of the day, there's still companies, even MOGL included, right, that are like, we can do this, we can provide that, we can share this, we can do that, right? And I think, again, given what you said earlier about being in Boston, being in Ann Arbor, being in Tampa, right, traveling with a sorority, doing leadership development, those experiences help to shape not just your experiences, but also inform your philosophy in regards to how you work with students. But there are a lot of people, again, I'm gonna call a spade a spade. There are a lot of people in athlete development that don't know this, right? Or may not know how to facilitate this, or may not be exposed to different leadership theories or identity development theories that help to then, guide a program from, ideation to execution. And so I guess if someone or some people that are, at D1, D2, D3 or high school NAIA level are just looking just to get started with NIL education, for this in air quotes for those that may not be watching, in athlete development programming, where can they start?
So one thing I feel like people who worked with me know this about me is I like to think a lot about the words that we use. And so to me, I would encourage someone to think about, what does the word education and what does the word support mean to you? Because I think different universities define NIL support, NIL education differently. And that's totally fine, because we're all different people who bring different definitions to different words, right? But I think if you're looking to get started, education and support that you're giving has to be defined very clearly. If education is simply bringing in a platform to have your students have access to, you can call that education, right? If you, from a Maryland Made perspective, we view education as hosting career readiness programs that are open to all student athletes that aren't explicitly NIL, but have NIL undertones to them. That's also education. And then if we think about support, is that having a designated person at your institution be the director of NIL? Or is that just having that so intertwined and connected with student athlete development that's not even a specific position, because that's what support looks like to your institution? So I'd say the first thing is defining those two words. At one, your capacity, what you can handle if you're working in a 1-person team, 5-person team, et cetera. But then also, like, what do the students need from the education support level? Because we see that students need something different and we need to ask them. I'm very passionate about that. We need to ask them what they're looking for, because I work with pre-health Terps specifically at Maryland, group of student athletes who want to, very phenomenal group of student athletes, might I add, who want to go into health professions. NIL for them looks very different than someone who's actually trying to go be an entrepreneur and start their own business, right? And so I think it's asking them, how do you define NIL education? How do you define NIL support? And what does that look like for you if I know you want to become a doctor in 5-6 years, however long you're going to be in school for, right? And so I think that's the baseline that I would suggest people start at.
It's interesting you say that, because I think that's the opportunity, and really going to be one of the inflection points in the next 1 to 2 years in regards to NIL. I call it NIL education. And what I mean by that is, whether it's athletes like Max, I saw Kennedy Tolson, shout out to her new business, and to get a plate soon. But like there's a lot of more athletes like choosing to go this entrepreneur, creator route, right? Where they don't need and or want and or opting into programming that universities are paying for. And I think as a result of that, we're going to see both Gen Z people that are in high school now entering college with a much different expectation of what to expect from universities with less NIL education and support. Are they going to see a lot of alums graduate the next 2 years, start their own businesses, focus on NIL education, given they have that experience being an NIL college athlete? And like, so I think it's a really interesting time to see like where current athletes are going, but also how alums are getting involved, both in collectives and non-collectives. What you thinking?
Well, because one thing that just came to mind as you were talking for me was like, I think at least what I've seen from the platforms that universities are partnered with, it's like getting them access to photos of them. Get like, here's a way you can download all the photos that have been taken of you at competitions. We bring photographers to all of our career readiness programs because that is also photo content that I want these students to have access to. So going back to Max, he got professional photos of him leading this session. He used that in his new graphic that he's using to get more clients moving forward. And it's like, that's easy for us to do, right? We have a whole marketing staff that have cameras and videos. We're bringing them to our programs anyways. I'm giving that content to students so that, and I'm thinking we had a panel during that session too, Ashley, Terp, Gerald, like they now all have that content too. And the first thing I said to them after that session, I said, if y'all don't make a post about this on LinkedIn within the next week, I'm calling you to my office, because that is like prime content for them, because they just spoke to a room of 30 young student athletes about the benefits of an internship, right? What that, can be used in like the same context that we're talking about having a local deal or a deal with like your local Olive Garden or whatever. Like to me, that is like needs to be brought into the conversation in that way. In terms of giving students that support, is like, it's not just photos of you at your sport or whatever. It's like these other photos of you kind of in your life doing who you are that is like attractive to these companies as well.
Max, you're going to hear this episode, and if not, I will personally cut this clip, because for all the time you gave me hell for writing a LinkedIn post for you to then lead a session, you owe me some money at some point. I need something. Give me a plate or something. I know Sophie over here laughing. That's hilarious. I love that. But I want to move forward to segment 3. And this is focused on action items, because again, I think the conversation today is really just to provide a little appetizer, if you will, for what's happening at Maryland. I would think also, challenge or really critique what's going on as well in the current NIL landscape, which I'll continue to say, like we've done a lot of celebrating, we've done a lot of honoring, but like let's also critique, right, and get better together. But as we leave today, Sophie, 3 things you want our audience to remember and leave with after our conversation together.
The first one is, I've been thinking about this when you said over the questions. So I think the first one is include career readiness in your NIL programming. Like, full stop. I don't even think I really need to explain that more, but I just feel extremely passionate about like building these as skills that they can use for life. And I think that we miss a lot in student development when we say, well, why does everything get thrown to us? Why are we the unit that collects everything that other people, don't have the capacity to do, whatever? But look at it as an opportunity to include that in your career readiness programming, your identity development programming. That's like a very easy way to help young people figure out their purpose, their values, their story, and connect that to something that can build career ready skills for them. One thing that we do a lot, we just started this year, was micro internships. Like, why stick an athlete in internship for 8 weeks if they don't actually know what they want to do? So we've designed this micro internship program. But I think that's also ways that athletes can leverage their NIL and career readiness, is to do these mini internship exposure opportunities with businesses to figure out if that's what they really want to do. And I think if they can get paid doing that from an NIL perspective, it's a win-win for everybody. So 1, include career readiness in your include NIL in your career readiness education, include career readiness in your NIL education, vice versa. I think the second thing is think about identity groups when you're doing NIL, because I'm thinking specifically with first gen students. Like, one, NIL was new for everybody, but specifically for first generation students, that's an even tougher place for them to navigate, because they look at money very differently. Like, any higher ed research will show you the impact of money on first gen students. I was actually just reading an article a few weeks ago about how first gen employees actually need a lot more support in their workplaces than what a lot of companies and industries are giving them, because navigating a workplace as potentially the first college educated person in your family to be employed is challenging. So I'm thinking about really including and amplifying the experiences of certain identity groups within NIL. So I know you talk, and MOGL talks a lot about women and the impact of women within NIL, but I would love to see more of an emphasis on supporting first gen students, where money is actually like a huge part of their identity as a first gen individual. And then I would say the third piece is let's continue thinking what this next iteration of NIL looks like. I think, something I ask you a lot from like a MOGL perspective is like, what are all these companies that are creating? Like, I think you sent me something yesterday about Walmart and like, Meta has their own, NIL, Empower programs, those kinds of things. But like, what is the next iteration moving forward, and how can student development departments get ahead of that? And be included in those conversations to figure out how can we be leveraging all of these different opportunities that industries and businesses are putting out there to connect our students with internships, to connect them with jobs. Because at the end of the day, I think we all have this goal of wanting students to be employed once they graduate. And so how can we use these different opportunities to then think about what the next iteration of NIL can be to support students beyond being influencers or whatever people want to call them at this point?
Debating if I want to share my thoughts because we could probably talk another 40 minutes. I think more employers are going to go this NIL cohort-based thing, yo. And the reason I say that is because it's opportunity. It's an internship, like you said, right? And I think we've seen Pepsi do this. Pepsi got ahead of this way early, like a couple years ago. But if you're teaching NIL skills and whatnot, right, bringing a few coaches like yourself into this program, while also training them for careers within your company, right? You can retain them like Microsoft or like, these other tech companies to then work full time. And again, I think, there's been a few athletes who have started their own leadership academies or NIL academies, right, focused on. So I think we're going to see more athlete driven, right, or NIL alum athlete driven programming models in the next 2-3 years.
Yeah, like, it's almost like creating a rotational program, right, for these companies of like, I don't have to put all this training then once you're hired to onboard you because you've already gotten that experience, and then I'm ready to actually hire you, right?
Exactly.
So I think that's huge. I actually really like that. And I think the other thing that in terms of like the athlete driven piece is I think we're just continuing, and I think this is another guest call to action, so maybe this is 3.5, but like empower your athletes to tell their stories, like give them platforms to really show who they are. Because I think when you're thinking of these athlete driven things, like people are going to join people with great stories. And I think that we don't talk about that enough. Like I'm thinking about, what are ways that companies are going to continue. I think, who was it? There was one like specifically designed for women. I have to go back and look at it, but I'm thinking about like, how are we encouraging athletes to use their own individual unique stories that help them with the identity development piece that then allows them to like, one, embrace their own identities and figure what that is, but then other people are going to join alongside that because people are joining people with those stories.
I think it was Puma or Champion.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So like, I just think that's so important because like, why wouldn't we do that? Like, that's how people connect all the time with other people, like outside of like the work that we do in higher ed. Because you connect with a person because of who they are, their energy, their story. And I think if we continue to use that and focus on that piece with NIL, that is going to also change the game.
Which is good. I'm gonna be quiet. I'm gonna stop us right there. Sophie, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you, my friend.
Your jacket is sticky. What'd you say it was?
Spicy.
I call it sticky. Shout out to Drake. Happy birthday, Drake. Your jacket is sticky, but this whole time I'm over here looking at my hat and looking at this NCAA inclusion shirt, and I'm like, this is not a fit.
Oh, sometimes we have those days. I mean, mainly because it's Ohio State. It's an Ohio State hat also, which is like a double, miss, but it's okay. You can take the L again. Second time.
I'm over 2 in the last like 72, bro. This is not good. Sophie, anything you want to share with people before we head out?
No, I think thanks everyone for taking the time to listen. If you don't already, follow Maryland Made on Instagram and LinkedIn and Twitter, MD Made Terps on all platforms. I think that is where you'll definitely see a lot of the groundbreaking important work that the Maryland Made team is doing to just further push the envelope in terms of what we think is possible. And that sometimes includes having food trucks in your football stadium. So
uncharted waters, man. Everyone else, thank y'all for tuning in to the episode of the MOGL podcast. Again, definitely connect with Sophia. I'll be sure to put her contact information in the description of this podcast episode. Doing phenomenal work in College Park and look forward to supporting them as they continue to move forward and educating all athletes at that institution. As always, let's ride. Get MOGL.